Once again, another Berserk chapter has been released, and this time it is a special one. Berserk chapter 270 marks the last chapter for the Fantasia Arc, meaning the story has reached a huge attainment. Not only is it the end of an arc, but the end of an arc that was never thought or expected to end. Kouji Mori and Studio Gaga have been doing their best, and this achievement is truly something to be proud of. Continuing Kentaro Miura's legacy with a high effort that the 6 chapters have shown is genuinely commendable. And well, chapter 370 was not the exception. It was yet another masterpiece and a joy to read. Personally, I felt like I finished reading this chapter in about 60 seconds, and I will explain why it felt so short for many in the community later on. Having said this, let's analyze chapter 370. Remember me saying it is a special chapter? Well, it surprised us with a colorful and joyful cover page, showing Danan, Shirka and Izma with Ishidra and other magical creatures in the background, including the phrase, "For a while, peaceful days like this were the norm." This right here hits different when knowing the outcome of this arc. This is because since the beginning of the arc, and especially the visit of Elfhelm, the story's feeling and vibe has been less intense than usual. Before chapter 265, where the Moonlight Boy transformed into Griffith, the story was considerably peaceful. Some members of the community even asked for more battles, fights, drama and such. And now that we got 6 chapters of pure mayhem where we have lost certain characters and felt all kinds of emotions, we look back at the old days. This took me back to God saying, "Why do I see these things after they're done and gone?" This quote goes back a long way, but it really encapsulates this specific moment. Sometimes we really don't value the present as much as we should. Whether we are referring to gods, the fandom, or even anyone unrelated to Berserk, this is what most people experience. In the old days that the cover page refers to, even though they were not the most entertaining combat-wise, they were unique and a clear contrast to what was about to come, a feeling of loss and despair. This feeling is portrayed in the first page. All the Seahorse crew members and refugees are struggling and evidently agitated, making their best to improve the situation as best as possible. The chapter starts by focusing more on the secondary characters, starting with Serpico looking for Lady Farnese. We see her and Shirka safe among the refugees in the boat. However, Serpico notices the absence of gods and Casca as well as the Moonlight Boy. Here is when Farnese breaks down. She starts crying and blames herself for not being able to help. This is followed by the reaction of everyone around. Serpico, Ishidro, Shirka, everyone has been hit by darkness, and there are many layers to this. Breaking it down, the loss of Elfhelm being the main one, the island represented a peaceful place, a magical one that was considered home for many, a place where family and friends were living in unity, and it is now all gone. Furthermore, Guts' crew and their connection directly impacts their well-being. For them, seeing Guts as he is right now is devastating. Guts has changed everyone's lives for good, whether he would admit it or not. For example, Ichiro has always looked up to him, and now that Izma just vanished in front of him, he realizes how devastating Guts' life has been. Shirka has gradually learned of Guts' struggles and life as she continues to follow him. This has been more evident when Shirka and Farnese entered Casca's consciousness a while back. And with Farnese, aside from knowing Guts' past life, she has another issue. She feels useless and wants to help Guts. Overall, she wants to be useful and somehow help the world in a positive way. But more specifically, Guts. The way Farnese sees it, the person who changed her and has made her a healthier and better human being is now suffering more than ever, and she can't do anything about it. She can't help the man who has helped her overcome her problems. She is not at the level to be by his side. Farnese is such a complex and interesting character. She's personally one of my favorite ones, and I suggest watching my chapter 369 video if you feel the same way. I mentioned some interesting stuff regarding Guts' and Farnese's relation. Going back to the chapter, suddenly the most awaited character appeared. Molda shouts at Farnese and the others, waking them up from the situation they are at. Everyone is feeling lost, but they can still help around. She suggests Farnese to help her using her healing magic abilities. Farnese realizes she must help and agrees. Shirka consequently follows her, and Molda stops her by describing Guts' state. He was safely brought to the boat, but as Molda states, he seemed like a broken man. And this is very interesting, seeing the difference between Shirka and Molda's view on gods. While Molda thinks about the dangerous consequence of gods using the armor, Shirka is more worried about gods himself. Shirka knows the dangers of the armor, but her first thought is gods, not the armor's power being unleashed. Of course, Molda is not close to gods, so her reaction is reasonable. Nevertheless, it was an interesting bit that I noticed. Going back, Roderick is seen signaling and directing everyone to successfully escape. He then shows his concern regarding Guts, as he's locked inside a room while Roderick keeps shouting out his name trying to grab his attention. Guts is seen staring at his sword. He falls down, and when he hits the floor, his sword also falls to the ground. Here, a very relevant but sad scene starts. Guts' thoughts are shown while he recalls some past memories. All this time, when I couldn't depend on anything else, anyone else, when I had nothing, I still had your strength to hold on to. You were all I had. This is how the chapter ends. And remember how at the start I said that the chapter felt very short? Well, this is because the actual dialogue and panels by themselves are pretty basic, yet have a lot of meaning behind them. For example, the last 3 pages, if read slowly and really thinking about past events till this point, these 3 pages can be processed for a very long time. And this is exactly what I did. To truly understand these last panels, we should first start questioning, what is the meaning of the sword? First of all, it is important to point out that the sword Guts is referring to is not the Dragon Slayer. Although he is looking at the Dragon Slayer, the word sword is symbolic. The sword Guts is referring to is the one that has followed him since childhood. The sword is the thing Guts has been holding on to that has helped and supported him all his life to keep moving forward. As stated before, the sword is symbolic. We could even see this as a single sword, one that includes all the ones that have been wielded by Guts. From the tiny wooden sword from childhood, to the ones used in fights, to the ones broken in battles, and of course, the Dragon Slayer. The sword has aided Guts in many ways. It has protected him from dangers, using it to block more powerful adversaries than him, and it has also given him protection, security, and comfort while he sleeps. This has been shown multiple times where we see Guts sleeping holding his sword and even hugging it at times. He has also faced obstacles where the sword has given him the opportunity to fight and move forward. Lastly, the sword has provided Guts a standing ground, keeping him above all hardship time and time again. Now, all hope seems lost. Guts has mentioned before how the only thing he knows to do is swing his sword. The sword has been a huge element in the story, from childhood, the golden age, the bonfire of dreams, God's speech about life. It has been there every time. So Guts giving up on his sword is a big deal. After all he has been through, he has still gotten up, and although I think he will, this time Guts will have to come back from an all-time low. I would like to point out that I truly appreciate the implementation of flashbacks, not only because it's strongly connected to the impactful scene, but it shows that Kouji, Mori and the team are keeping in mind all the previously established story and lore. This is very important since it shows the importance, respect, and seriousness they are giving to Kentaro Miura's legacy. Now, regarding some curiosities and little details, in the last chapter, many were speculating that Puck was dead. And in my previous video for chapter 369, I explained how I did not get that idea while reading. In this new chapter, we see that Puck as well as Valera are alive, so why did they survive? And there are some explanations I thought of. The first one being that perhaps Puck and Guts work as opposites. Like the island of Elfhelm needed a dark side to stay alive, maybe Guts is that side keeping Puck alive. But Shirka and Valera don't share this similar connection, so it must be a different thing. The second thing I thought about is that the creatures who have lived away from the island are not bound to Elfhelm, so they cannot die. But as we saw, the Marrows who did not live in Elfhelm vanished as well. So it is indeed quite confusing, but I truly think it is not a plot hole since the story has given explanation of certain stuff in future chapters. So what's next? The next chapter, releasing on December, will mark the beginning of a new arc. The story can go in two different directions, and I believe there are three ways to go about it. The first one being dialogue heavy and exposition chapters to explain the character's motivation and resolves. This includes gods and all the secondary characters. The second way is a time skip. It was previously stated that time flows different in Elfhelm, so perhaps we will see some changes to the environment and some progress with Rickard and his new teammates. And the third option is showing Falconia, meaning Griffith's perspective along Cascas. This would work the same way as they did in this arc, where they switched from Guts' to Griffith's perspective, and it would be a great idea to do it once again. That has been my Berserk chapter 370 analysis, and as stated before, there is a lot to look forward to for the next chapter. Until then, take care.